Thanks for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. With the revival of the Misery Index, a 1970s-era calculation of inflation plus unemployment, Canada ranks a high 6th amongst industrialized countries. What does that mean for Canadians as our standard of living is affected? Our monthly panel returns to go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. Welcome back the Honourable Joe Oliver, former Canadian Minister of Finance, Sandra Pupatello, former Ontario Economic Development Minister, and Gary Maher, former Alberta Cabinet Minister and now head of the Canada West Foundation. Welcome to you all. And speaking of misery, since you are former recovered politicians as I am, we also have the events in Ottawa for the past few days sort of culminating at the time of recording of this with the vote in the Conservative caucus to remove Erin O'Toole as the Conservative leader. Love to get a hot take from our members of the panel, including starting with Joe, because he was in caucus with me and knows a little bit about caucus dynamics, but would love to hear the other panelists as well. Joe, why don't you lead off with your reaction?
Well, sure. For Erin O'Toole, it was very high on the misery index because it's inflation plus unemployment, and now he's unemployed. Look, I think it wasn't a surprise. Unfortunately, Erin wasn't resonating with the public or with the Conservative base, and so a decision was taken, and it was a decisive decision. Now we'll await the appointment of an interim leader. I guess that's going to happen this evening, and then perhaps in the fall, a new leader. In my view, this is a real opportunity for the Conservative Party to do a number of things. First of all, it's an opportunity to enunciate a vision for Canada, a vision of Canada that Canadians remember, that Canadians identify with and really and love. It's an opportunity for the Conservative Party to start rebuilding the trust in authority and in government that's been lost for a variety of reasons especially during the last couple of years of the pandemic. And it's a chance for the party to advance policies that will create growth, employment, prosperity. And I think in the light of the challenges that Canada has, and in my opinion, the fact that the country is headed in the wrong direction, this is an opportunity not only for the Conservative Party, but for Canadians to right the ship and have contemplate a better future than we're looking at right now.
Sandra Pupatello, what's it like being a Liberal looking at all this?
Well, I have to say, when you realize that the main opposition is going to be very introspective in the next many months and not really bothering with their critic portfolios or doing the job of official opposition, that's probably good news for the governing Liberals. I have to say I was surprised by the outcome because on a popular vote, I thought Erin O'Toole actually did quite well, albeit, not picking up the seats he needed. The guy who really must be just sweating right now is Jagmeet Singh. Over the course of 2 campaigns, he lost half the seats of their party. He did not gain seats, and yet he seems to be getting a free ride in all this. And poor Erin, who did so well in popular vote, even in this last one, he just got the boot. And, so it really, for me, I sat back and said, my biggest fear was had Peter MacKay won that leadership back then, I think the Liberals would have had a harder fight. For me, given how this vote's come out, all I can think of is that we're going to have a more right-wing leader of the Conservative Party, and that bodes very well for anybody center and left, and that means the Liberals. So I'm heartened by what happened because chaos on the other side is good for the Liberals, and all we can think of is who on earth is going to want to step in now. A very divisive party from what I can see.
Gary Maher, I want to hear from you on this, but before I do, because we just have a few seconds before the break, I'll just I'll agree with both of the panelists so far, in a sense, one of my adages is, when your opponent is digging a hole, don't interrupt them. Let them keep digging, and I
Well,
think
you
that's
remember that time, Tony, because after every campaign, it seems when the leaders lost an election, there would be the dump
oh
the
my
leader
gosh,
movement.
yeah.
And I've watched that happen from close up, and it's awful.
And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with the monthly panel as we discuss the issues of the day. Gary Maher, last word on the events in Ottawa with Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. What do you think about it all?
Look, I think Erin O'Toole is a Canadian who has served his country in many ways, both in uniform and in Parliament. He has served the people of his riding in Durham very, very well. I think the challenge that he had, and this goes back to something that Joe talked about, is that the vote in caucus, to change up the leader was a pretty decisive one. This is not one that was close to the edge. It wasn't a 50-50 vote. It was pretty decisive. And I think that the difficulty that Erin had is that on the one side, he would campaign for the leadership as a true blue conservative and then sort of move back to the center for a general election. And I think that there was just an exhaustion about what it was that Erin O'Toole stood for, whether he was on the right or on the left. I think it was a great challenge, and it speaks to some of the diversity that exists within the Conservative Party. But like Joe, I think that this represents an opportunity for somebody who can unify those that remain within the party and move forward. And so on that part, I'd agree with Joe. But like Sandra says, it's such a tumultuous time right now in the months that come up before the leadership is held. I think this provides some really long runway for the incumbent government.
Well, maybe the analyst Steve Paikin is right. Justin Trudeau is going to try to pull William G. Davis, former Premier of Ontario, who had a majority, two minorities and a majority. So maybe Justin Trudeau is going to try to do the same thing. Joe, did you want to have a last word on this?
Well, yeah, just look, on the assumption that Trudeau doesn't do the outrageous thing and call another election during a pandemic, there's quite a bit of time, and it certainly will be disruptive in the short term. But I think that will be a memory, a fairly distant memory when the election is in fact called.
Well, depending on the outcome, I guess I have to say that the beneficiaries could well be the PPC, because those who aren't going to be happy with the outcome of the next leader and who that might be, they're going to bail. They're going to say, we're not going to put up with that again. And off they go to their old friend Bernier, who used to be a conservative. And there goes the splintering once again of the Conservative Party into Preston Manning's reform.
So what we've got from the Liberals is if they pick far right, they're doomed. And if they pick far left, they're doomed as well.
Well, because I do think, the benefit has long been, and Peter MacKay knew that too, and that's why he had to pull the party together, that the Tories couldn't win as long as they were that divided. And I think that's where they're headed again. So that's good news for the Liberals. Yeah,
I don't think that's where they're headed. But that we'll soon see.
So they might come calling back and they'll say, Joe, we need you to come back. We need you to come back.
No.
I don't know which is the most. I
don't know what side is going to come calling for you.
Joe's probably had some emails already, I'm sure, but we're sticking with the monthly panel, both of us. Canada, just getting back to another topic, perhaps the main topic, but we are suffering from both inflation and unemployment. I'd love to get your reactions to that. Maybe Sandra, start with you.
Sure. Well, you know what? I hate these rankings because it's like by how much are we ahead or behind other Western countries? And in fairness, we're like a smidge ahead or below many countries, not just 6. So we're all in that range. And the point there is that all of us are seeing more employment than we're used to and higher inflation for sure than we're used to. I was very nervous watching Tim Macklem coming out with his announcements. And we know that we're headed into higher interest rates, and that's always worrisome. People over 50, frankly, remember what happened in the 80s with interest rates, and we don't want to go back there. On the other hand, every Western nation is dealing with this. I think some of the cause isn't, governmental and policy. Like I know Joe is going to chime in any moment, but it is issues that are global, like supply chain. When you can't get things, the prices go up. And we've been watching that for the last 2 years. So until these things calm down and start to regularize, I think we are going to be seeing increased prices. And for that, we worry for families that are right at the edge.
We're going to continue with this discussion. I want to leave it at that until we get to the break so that we give our other guests the fulsome amount of time they deserve to respond as well. So stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. And we're back here at Boom and Bust with the monthly panel, the Honorable Joe Oliver, former Minister of Finance, Sandra Pupatello, a former Economic Development Minister for Ontario, and Gary Maher, who's head now of the Canada West Foundation. Joe Oliver, misery index, we're seen to be near the top of the table. Sandra is not too concerned about that. Everybody's suffering. What's your point of view on this?
Well, I guess, Sandra, if I may summarize her point of view, the numbers don't mean anything. And to the extent they do, it's not the government's fault. Well, look, the truth is, the fact is, everybody thought that the supply chain shortage crunch was going to increase prices. And of course it has, but it clearly isn't the only issue, which is why inflation is enduring. And there's no question that the extraordinary fiscal stimulus and now debt is exacerbating the problem in a very significant way. The supply shortages will eventually abate, but inflation doesn't look like it's going to, unless the banks take pretty severe steps. Now, they're going to increase interest rates, we think, by perhaps 100 basis points, let's just say 1 point or two, or maybe a point and a half. That's to say perhaps 4 or 6 times and a quarter a time during the next year. Whether that will be enough, whether it will push us into a downturn, I mean, those are the risks, and I say that without being critical of our central bankers, in spite of the fact that they've misjudged the extent of inflation. But we have a serious debt problem. It's not something people focus much about but it's manifested itself in inflation, which people do focus on because that's affecting the price of food and the price of housing and gasoline and virtually everything else. And by the way, our number, which is lower than the U.S. number, is partly due to the fact that the CPI does not in Canada include used cars. And that particular item by itself would move our number up quite a bit, and therefore our misery index. It needn't be tragically bad, but we have to take steps to contain expenditures. Not necessarily, we're not into austerity. That's not needed, but we've got to contain expenditures, which are clearly way out of control, and focus on growth. That's the way you deal with debt, whose burden will obviously increase with inflation, because with inflationary increases and increases in interest rates, right, the amount of the debt, the impact of the debt burden is that much more severe.
Gary Maher, I want to turn to you now. Your point of view on this, maybe coming from the Western Canada, a little bit different or the same?
Look, the misery index it has its criticisms, of course. It's a relatively simple calculation of inflation and unemployment. That doesn't mean it's not useful. And it is a snapshot in time. And I think what this snapshot tells us is that we should be concerned about inflation. And one of the things that, from a Western Canadian perspective, you would want to think about is energy, whether it's the cost of your utilities or whether it's the cost of filling up the tank of your gasoline, whether it's the fuel that goes into a truck that brings your groceries to your grocery store, all of it's going up, largely because of some of the energy policies of the federal government. And so whenever you've got a circumstance where you've got, a restriction on the supply, that is to say the production of oil and gas or fossil fuels, and a demand that is steady or even increasing, you're going to have an inflationary cycle. And I think that as we move towards, a transition to other types of fuel, we have to recognize that we still need to have the traditional, sources of energy that we currently use to be able to move our trucks, to be able to move our cars, to be able to heat our homes. And so I think that's something that's not well considered by the federal government, which has gone much further in terms of trying to reach GHG targets that may or may not be realistic with the current technologies that are available out there.
Thanks for that, Gary. We're going to continue this conversation. We still have one more segment after the break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, with the monthly panel talking about all things politics, economics, the things that matter to you. Bank of Canada rate announced that they were steady at the current rate, the current low rate, but a little bit of hinting that things are going to change in the future. Joe Oliver, as a former finance minister, what's your take on where we're going?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that rates are going up, and they're going to go up a multiple number of times. I mean, there's even a possibility of a half a point increase. More likely, I think people are expecting quarter point increases. I'd say the conventional view is at least 4 times, maybe 6 times during the year. So we're talking about a point to a point and a half increase in rates. Now, that's not a big number by itself, but it's a big percentage increase. And so, it may worry the market somewhat, although it's clearly anticipated. And the question is, what effect will it have? For example, on homeowners who may be excessively leveraged, or certain businesses which are hanging on by a thread as a result of COVID. So, as I say, the number increase isn't immense, but it will, of course, add to the annual debt burden. And given the immense amount of debt, I mean, we're talking 1.2 trillion in total here. We're really we're really in a period of some potential difficulty. I don't think we are in a crisis situation, and assuming interest rates don't have to respond to too persistent inflation, it should be manageable.
Gary Maher, are you concerned about rate hikes in the future?
I'd have to say this isn't my area of expertise to comment on, but I think it will have an effect on some homeowners who may be over-levered. What you're seeing right now is that there's actually a lot of people that are buying in the Calgary market in anticipation that rates are going up. So the home real estate market in Calgary has actually gone through a bit of a boom. It's twofold. One is, part of it is because of the anticipation of interest rates going up set by the Bank of Canada, but also you've got people from British Columbia and particularly Ontario that are buying homes that they find to be much, much more affordable here in Alberta than they are where they come from. So in addition to the impact that, an increase in the rate will have on home ownership in the future, it's having the anticipation of it is having an impact on housing prices right now.
Sandra Pupatello, final word on this. Rates going up, or what's your concern?
I just wonder if that, 100 basis points, does that add $50 to your mortgage payment or 100? When your mortgage payment is over $3,000 and you're carrying a mortgage for $1 million home, I don't know that in and of itself is going to make a difference. It's the price of that house in the first place. A place like Windsor, the average home selling for nearing $600,000, like we've never seen that before. How do they afford the down payment? So I hope that this might spur a big focus of every level of government to get more building in the marketplace and get more supply. Ultimately, that's the only thing that's really going to cool the housing market, is having more to buy. Because right now, whether it's COVID or whatever, people needing their own space, it's just driven these prices through the roof. And
so I think Sandra's right on this point, but a lot of policies are not in favor of actually expansion of the supply of houses. So if you look at the federal government, they're trying to tamp down on the demand by talking about things like, foreign, speculation taxes and, foreign ownership restrictions. I mean, you can only move the market a bit by dealing with the demand side of it. It's really opening things up for greater supply that's going to make housing affordable.
Every level of government, though, whether that's local in terms of getting those developers moving more quickly through their system, provincially for having land actually available to build, federally for support in affordable housing programs. So every level needs to get it together and get more supply in the marketplace.
I sense a great topic to continue next month for the panel. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.